Hello everybody, Bruce here with a lecture on Chapter 4 in the textbook, How to Use CSS to Format the Elements of a Web Page. So let's get started. The objectives of this particular chapter, the applied objectives, are given an HTML document, create a CSS style sheet for formatting the web page using any of the types of selectors or rules that are presented in this chapter. Number 2, given an HTML document with one or more CSS style sheets applied to it, use the developer tools for your browser to inspect the styles. Given a selector in the CSS for an HTML document, describe what the selector applies to. As far as knowledge objectives, describe the 3 ways to include CSS in a web page. Number 2, explain why it's usually best to use an external style sheet for formatting a page. Can't reinforce that one enough. Number 3, describe the purpose of the Normalize.css style sheet. Number 4, distinguish between absolute and relative units of measurement. Number 5, describe 3 ways to specify color in CSS and describe how CSS3 expands upon that. Number 6, describe these types of selectors: universal, type, ID, class, descendant, child, sibling, pseudo class, and pseudo element. Number 7, describe one accessibility guideline for using pseudo class selectors. Number 8, explain how user style sheets, important rules, and specificity are used in the cascade order for applying style rules. Number 9, describe these properties for styling fonts: font family, font style, font weight, font size, and line height. Describe these properties for formatting text: text indent, text align, text decoration, and text shadow. Now, some of these things are repeat from prior modules, but again, they can't be reinforced enough. Also, there's a lot in Chapter 4. And we're slowly getting to the point where we will be able to craft some meaningful pages that look good. So after this week, we're going to dive right in. All right. So 3 ways to provide styles. Number 1 is the preferred way, and that's to use an external style sheet. In this class, that's all we use. All right. That's all we use: external style sheets. You can embed style information in the head section of a web page, and some of the examples today that I'm going to show you, in fact, they're provided by the textbook author, and I link to them in Module 0, so if you're not using those example files to follow along with the stuff in the book, then you are missing out. So the embedded style goes in the head section between a set of style tags and then just your selectors and your declarations, and that's it. All right. Again, it's good for testing and teaching, but it's something we tend not to do anymore. And then use the style attribute to apply styles to a single element. Now, we never do this, okay? In this class, we never, ever, ever, do what you see at the bottom of the screen there, where you have that H1 tag, you have a style attribute, and then a font size, a color. You don't do that because that totally goes against having a style sheet for a particular site. And if I see that, I'm going to write right back to you and say, nope, I ain't looking at it until you get rid of that inline CSS. And if you use your Google PhD, you're going to find a lot of that out there, and I'll know you're using your Google PhD when I see it in assignments. So please, 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 please don't include it. All right. The sequence in which the provided styles are applied. So the external style sheets come first, and then the embedded styles, and then the inline styles. So here you can see that if you provided a style sheet and then someone went ahead and placed some embedded CSS in a head section or even inline styles, it's going to override, right, the style sheet that you developed. All right, so external style sheets all the time. All right, so you can see here in the head section, right, there are two style sheets that are referenced. And if you, by the way, if you go into Canvas, I created a video. I think it's in Unit 7 for Module 4. And if it's changed in the future, I apologize. But you can see the href attribute has /styles/main.css and then /styles/speaker.css. And what the // means is go up a folder in the folder structure, the hierarchy of the folders. All right, so go watch that video. All right. The sequence in which the styles are applied from the first external style sheet to the last. So in this example, the main.css style sheet will get loaded, and then the speaker.css. So if you have styles that overwrite things that were defined in the main, that's what's going to happen. Cascading style sheets. Okay. So normalize.css, you'll see it in this week's one of the assignments. Again, if this changes in the future, it just may. There's a link to normalize.css in Canvas. And this style sheet helps normalize the way that CSS gets applied across different web browsers. So it really, sometimes, not as much anymore, but sometimes something rendered in Google Chrome will look different in Internet Explorer or Firefox. So we are going to be incorporating normalize.css into our work going forward. And the first style sheet that you're going to link to is going to be normalize, and then one or more style sheets after that. All right. So there you go. You can download normalize.css. It's also in Canvas. And it says at the bottom, normalize.css makes minor adjustments to browser defaults, so all browsers render HTML elements the same way. It also sets the default font family to sans serif. Now, some of you may have heard of what's called reset.css. That's a little bit different. In fact, in Canvas, there is a link that describes the difference between normalize.css and reset.css. Okay, we'll cover reset in other classes if you continue on your web development work. Common units of measure. In fact, I think this is on a quiz. px for pixel, pt for point, em for m. And by the way, an m is the size of the capital letter M as the default size in a web browser. Rem or root M refers to the size of the root font, okay, defined in, say, the body. M's are relative to their parent in the document object model, the web page DOM structure. And then percentage, right? You can say that make this thing 50% or 200%. And again, there's an exercise, an assignment in this module that's going to have you deal with that. Okay. So the HTML for a web page that will have borders. So let me just look. Yeah. So here is some sample HTML markup. It's not a complete HTML document. And you can see it's got a header section, and it's got an H1 in the header. And then in the main content, there's a paragraph. That's it. What a great web page, right? And in the style sheet for this, that that you see on the screen here, the font size is 100%. The margin left is 2 M's. The margin right is 2 M's. So next week we talk about the box model, and you're going to learn a lot about the difference between margin and padding. So stay tuned for that. The next thing says, the header element, the header selector, set the padding bottom to 3/4 of 1 M. The border bottom to 3 pixels solid black. The margin bottom to 0. And then the H1 selector, right? These selectors apply to these elements, H1s, headers, and of course there's only one body. But for the H1 element, you have font size 200% and then margin bottom 0. Okay, so get to write those down. Write some of those property names down. Go look them up. See what they do. Play around with them. All right. So that's what that web page looks like. Okay. So again, you can see the H1 has a margin bottom and a font size that's bigger. See that? See how the font size is bigger? The header has a border bottom of 3 pixels solid black. You see that right there? Okay. And there's some margin on the left and right. If you look at the box, right, there's a margin on either side. Okay, more about that next week. Box model. All right, 3 ways to specify colors as properties in CSS. You can use color, followed by a colon, like all CSS property values. And then silver, there's a list of all these colors that you can use by name. I prefer to use the RGB or RGBA. So RGB represents red, green, blue value, and you can use percentages like you see on the screen there, right? Or you can use these numbers 0 through 255 for red, green, and blue. And in Canvas, I link to I believe the Adobe color site where you can, figure out what colors things are. In fact, you could do it in Visual Studio Code. When you're coding your CSS. In fact, let me just hop over. Okay, let me hop over to Visual Studio Code here. And I have the chapter 4 files open. So actually, this is not the file I wanted, but let's see if I can find a color somewhere. Probably up there's one. So see this? This is a style sheet. I'm in Visual Studio Code, and if I hover my mouse over it, you see that? You see what I get there? Look at the top. It says RGB 255 255 0. I can select different colors. I'm not going to do it right now. I don't want to mess my style sheet up. But that's how you do it right within Visual Studio Code. Hover your mouse. Okay? Play from current slide. There we go. And then, as you can see here, 6 Fs with a hash sign and a semicolon at the end of each property value pair in your CSS. Don't forget. This is white. 6 zeros is black. And this is red, right? Red, green, blue. So FF is the highest value you can have, right, for red. And then nothing for green and blue, so the color will come out red. All right? CSS that uses hexadecimal values for colors. Again, you can see, whoa, I keep doing that. I don't know why. So here is a color, and there's a shorthand way to write it. I always prefer to write out the full color names. Somehow, one of my cords from my headset, I think, is hitting the mouse. And here, again, you can write shorthand. Write out the full color name. It's going to make you a better developer. All right, that's my advice. So that's what that page will look like with that CSS applied, right? The yellow, the blue, etc. That stuff right there. All right. Okay. Accessibility guidelines for colors. Now, remember the visually impaired. I'm visually impaired. I don't know if many of you know that. I'm legally blind. I don't drive a car. But yet I'm able to do what I'm doing. All right, more on this. Dark text on a light background is easier to read, and black type on a white background is easiest to read. Now, there's something called WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, for color contrast. I highly recommend that you go visit that link and you see what some of the guidelines are. More and more organizations are asking web developers to develop their code such that it's accessible. And just know, as you learned in week 1, module 1, that accessibility goes just beyond people who can't see, right? And then I listed here 3 different sites you can go to check the contrast between 2 colors. And one of the WCAG guidelines suggests a color ratio of 4.5 to 1. So you compare your foreground color, your text color, with the background color. All right? Let's carry on. So there are new ways to specify color in what's called CSS3. I just call it CSS, but CSS3 has this RGBA, which is the red, green, blue that we spoke of before, with an opacity value. So remember, opacity values can go anywhere from 0 to 100, right? And as you lower the opacity, do you know what's going to happen? I want you to try it on something, all right? The syntax for HSL is another type of color property, and HSLA. HSL, right? Use saturation and light, right? You specify U degrees, saturation percent, and the percent of lightness. And HSLA is going to give you the same with an opacity, all right? So there are other things that you should know for values. You have opacity value, U degrees, saturation percent, and lightness. You know, I'm introducing you to these right now. I usually use just RGBA or just color. But just know that there are different ways in CSS to specify color. Okay, I could teach a whole course on color and color theory, but we don't have time. All right, so there you can see in this CSS we have H1s defined and different ways to define color, right? And different colors, right? The first one is transparent green, dark green, pastel green, semi-transparent, solid blue, semi-transparent because it has a 0.5 opacity, and the opacity, as I said, they go from 0 to 1. I think I said 0 to 99. It's 0 to 1. All right, so that's what that looks like in the browser. All right, so HTML, right? The whole purpose of CSS is to target specific elements, right? Identified either by their element type, their ID, or a class name, and then apply the CSS rules that you define. So in this particular markup, you can see you have the paragraph that has a class equals blue, right? The class is the attribute, the value is blue. And then on the next paragraph, you have an ID with the ID value of copyright. And then you have a class name that actually has a class attribute that has 2 values, blue and right. And that's something you can do. You can apply, just like it's done there, 2 classes to an attribute. So let's look at the class blue. So look at the bottom where it says dot blue, color blue. There you go. So that's how you define in HTML class equals blue, no dot, but in the CSS dot blue and color blue. Now, I need to say this. Creating a class name given a color like that, blue, that's all well and good until someone asks you to change that blue color to red. And then your class name, if you don't change it, if it's blue, it's kind of stupid, right? So don't name classes or IDs after colors, all right? Pro tip. All right, so let's carry on. So the all elements, the asterisk, that means apply this margin to top and bottom, right and left of 0.5 ems and 1 em. Okay, that's a shorthand for writing margin. Again, more on that next week. And then the main element is saying, hey, give me a border that's 2 pixels, solid black, and padding of 1 em. Okay, so let's see. There you can see some padding around this season's speakers lineup, that entire box. Okay, whoops, I'm losing it here. Whoop. There we go. So, and then we have an H1 that has a font family of Arial, comma, sans, dash, serif. And when you have, I know this is on the quiz, when you have font names that take up more than one word, like Times New Roman, you need to include quotation marks around the words. Okay, there's not one on the screen here, but just know that. And then the copyright. See, in the HTML it said ID copyright, right? So there in the where it says 1 element by ID, pound copyright or # copyright, you can only have 1 element on a page with a specific ID, and this selector pound copyright is going to set the font size to 80%. And on the bottom there, elements by class, we did .blue, but .right is going to align the text to the right. And if you go back here, see it says class equals blue and right. So both those classes, right? It's going to include both of those when it goes to render your page. And there it is. HTML can be selected by relationships in your CSS. I guess that means I need a sip of lemonade here. Please hold. My apologies. So just look at that CSS and listen to my squeaky chair. And let's take a look at what's going on here. These are things you have to know. Descendant selectors. So descendant selectors. Look at it where it says main space li. Main space li. That's a descendant. Okay? That means that this particular rule, where it's going to set the font size to 90%, is going to be applied to any list item in main. I read it from right to left. So that's any list item that's in the main element. As in the next example, any anchor link in an unordered list. Okay? So look at this. Whoops, look at this. Do we have any LIs in main? Yes, we do. So that rule will get applied. All right? Now, next, adjacent sibling. Adjacent sibling. And here's an example. Any paragraph that is directly after an H2. So let's look. Do we have, I always keep doing that. Do we have any H2s in there? I see some H2s. And do we have any paragraphs right next to it? And whoops. Yes, we do. You see H2? It's adjacent. They're next to one another. So that's how you would code that, with the plus sign. Then you have child selectors. And I say here main greater than P. And that says any paragraph element that is a direct child of main. A direct child of main. Okay? So you can see you have H1, UL, H2, and P, right? That P, right, is a child of main. Okay? And then you have LI greater than A. That says any anchor that is a direct child of an LI. And we had some of those, right, in this page here. You can see the list items where it says January, right? Got that? All right. It's going to take some getting used to. General sibling, a new feature of CSS3, that's where you write it with that tilde. That says any P that comes after. It should be comes after an H2. All right? All right, combinations of selectors. Now this is where it gets really powerful. Look at this one, ul.speakers. That's a really shorthand way of saying, hey, any UL that has the class of speakers, apply the list style type of square. Okay, that's any unordered list that has a class name, that's what that dot means of speakers. And the next one is multiple selectors separated by commas. And that means apply the color blue to H1s or H2s. Actually, it's and. Apply it to H1 and H2 and H3s. All those headings, right, get the color blue. Now, the next one says any paragraph and any UL that has the class of speakers. Actually, I'm going to rewind for a second. I'm going to go right to left. Any list item, okay, that, let's go back to our words here. Any list item that is a descendant of an unordered list that has the class of speakers, and any paragraphs will get their font family set, and there's the quotes around the multi-word Times New Roman or serif. Okay. Now, by the way, the font, you see two font names there. That means that, hey, try to use Times New Roman. If you can't find Times New Roman on the computer, go to the default serif font. Now, again, I'm going to reread that. Any list item that's a descendant of an unordered list that has the class speakers or any and all p tags or paragraphs. All right? It's really important to understand this stuff because this gives you tremendous power as a web developer to format specific elements on your web page certain ways. And you can get really funky with this stuff. Check this out. This is saying, right, this all elements with href attributes, right? So an anchor link, a link that you learned, I believe, in units 2 and 3. So this is saying any element that has an href attribute, set its font size to 95%. The next one, where it says A and then bracket href like that, says, hey, any anchor tag that has an href attribute, set its font family to Arial or sans serif. And then the next one says, when we do forms, you'll learn about this. It says any input form control that has the type of submit, like a submit button on a form, set its border, color, and background to those values. Woohoo, right? A lot of stuff, right? A lot of stuff. And I'm throwing a lot of things at you, and the book does too, because I want you to become familiar with them. I'm not going to ask you to be an expert on this stuff right away, but when you hear these words, they'll resonate a little bit, all right? And then there's something called Pseudo Classes. And I'm going to throw this in Canvas. There is a video I have on styling anchor tags with these pseudo classes: link, visited, active, hover, and focus. Link is the default color of the link. Visited is when the web page gets rendered and the user has already visited that particular web page. Active is the moment somebody clicks on that web page. Hover is when the person hovers their mouse and doesn't click over something. And focus is when that particular element gets the focus, all right? And then there are other pseudo classes for first child, last child, only child. And some of you are like, what? Right? So the first child, say, of the main, say it's, I don't know, an H2 or a section, whatever it may be, you can specifically target things using these pseudo classes. And we'll do more of this as we get more advanced. And then you can actually do these pseudo element things where you could make the first letter of a paragraph have a certain, uppercase or something like that, or the entire first line of a paragraph. Pretty amazing stuff, all right? HTML that can be used by pseudo class and pseudo element selectors. You can see there's a bunch of anchor tags, right? You've been working on this Tubin stuff with some of your assignments, right? So what this is doing is formatting the links, right, for different things. And the paragraph first child, font weight bold, and stuff like that. So let's look at this. See that W, how big it is? See that? That's all being done with CSS, right? It's saying the first paragraph, right? And then for the first child, right? It gets pretty funky, all right? So go through this. The files you have all these. They're linked to in Canvas, and if I go back to Visual Studio Code here, hello, Visual Studio Code. I think my mouse is wigging out. No! Do I need to charge my mouse a bit? Let's see what's going on here. It's like, no, I can't lose my mouse during the recording of this video, right? So I'm just charging it really quickly. It'll give you a chance to go get something to drink. Actually, I'm going to take a drink too. It's tough talking all this time. Let me see if that's enough juice to get me going here. Okay. Look at that. Saved. So all these different things I've been going through, they're right here. They're right in Canvas for you to download, right? You can play around, and they use embedded styles. So just don't worry about that right now. But there you go. All the things I've been showing you, right, are right in Canvas for you to download and play with. All right. Let's go back here. Continue. Play from current slide. Accessibility guidelines for hover and focus. Don't do stupid stuff. When the person hovers over something or focuses, don't make the font 10 times bigger or make it move, because that's not good accessibility, all right? I'm just telling you that. So the cascade order for applying CSS style rules, right? That's why it's called cascading style sheets. There is this thing called bang important, right? That's what that exclamation point, right? And that is something I don't want you to ever use, because we used to use it when we couldn't get something to work correctly. So we said, I want this font blue, make it blue. And it wasn't working, so you slapped on, an important thing after it and it worked. And then the normal rules in a web page, and then the normal rules in your style sheet. So all these things get applied, and the default rules in a web browser. So your web browser has rules for displaying paragraphs and H1s, right? Certain browsers have their own rules, and then you have your style sheet, etc. So just know that there's a lot of different things that go into play when you're coding your CSS. Here's an example where someone said, I want anything with the class of highlight to be bolded. In fact, they wanted the font weight to be bolded, right? But they couldn't get it to work, so they slapped on this exclamation point important. You don't need to do it, all right? Don't do it. I've never done it, all right? All right. So if more than one style rule at a cascade level is applied to an element, right, use the style rule with the highest specificity. If the specificity is the same for two or more style rules in a group, use the style rule that's specified last. Now, how to determine the specificity of a selector, right? These selectors, right, have weights. And depending upon their specificity, their weight, different things may override certain things in CSS. So an ID is the most specific, right? Remember I told you that IDs can only apply to one specific thing. A class, attribute selector, or pseudo class selector is less specific, and an element or pseudo element selector is least specific, right? So if you just code a selector in your CSS for a paragraph, right, that's the least specific, as opposed to using a class or an ID. All right. Now, I have a video that I created in Canvas that shows you how to use Google Chrome's developer tools. So, and there's some questions on the quiz about the key combinations to use in order to bring up this developer tool. So go watch that video, all right? I'm not going to talk about this here. The 5 generic font families: serif fonts, right? Sans serif, that means they don't have the little serifs on the edges, right? The serifs are those little nice little things that make the font good looking. Monospace font is kind of what you're seeing right now. It's like computer font, computer code type font. Cursive is just what you know. It's like a script. And then fantasy fonts are those that let me see if I have a picture. Yeah, here we go. So Times New Roman, right, is serif font. Arial or Verdana right there, they don't have those little serifs on the letters. Courier New is a monospace font. And Lucida handwriting, you can see, is cursive. And then Impact, right, is what they call a fantasy font. All right. So how to specify a font family and font size. So in your CSS, font-family, and then you order the font names that you want separated by commas, and remember to put the quotes around things like Times New Roman or Courier New, right? When they have multiple words. Font size, you can do it in points, right? You can do it in percentages, or you can do it in M's, okay? M's. 1 M is like 16 points, all right? And it's the default size of the capital letter M in your browser. A font family rule in the body element that is inherited by all descendants. So when you specify a font family in the body selector, every other element will get, through the cascading of the style sheet, will get that font family. However, you can specify a different font family in a selector. Like here we have a paragraph and we say, hey, for the paragraph I want you to have the font family be Times New Roman, Times, or the default serif font. All right. Other properties for styling fonts: font-style, okay, font-weight, font-variant, and line height. Line height, by the way, let's hop to line height first at the bottom there. That defines the interline height, right, that you can specify. Right? By default, you don't have to specify for a paragraph the line height. But if you want to make the text more readable or put more spaces between the lines of text, that's what you do. You use the line height property. Look at the font style. You have italic, normal, and small caps, right? For font variant, by the way. So italic or normal. And then with font weights, you can have numbers. I believe they go from 900 to 100. Just so you know, you can do font weight bold, font weight normal, which is 400. They give you that. And font weight bold is 700. And you can say font weight lighter relative to the parent element, all right? I usually use the font weight with numbers or font weight bold or normal, okay? The shorthand font property. Now notice how to use the shorthand font property. It says font, the italic, bold, and then it gives you the font and the line height, the font, and then the font names, okay? This is something I don't do that much. I tend to like to put separate declarations, property value pairs in my style sheets instead of trying to slam them all into one line like this. All right, so play with that when you can. It's in one of the sample files. Properties for indenting, aligning, and decorating text. Yes, we can decorate text. Text indent, text align. You've done some of the text align in some of the tutorials. Remember, we align text right, left, and justify. Do you remember that? Vertical align and text decoration. So text, there's some text, by the way. Here's the CSS. And you can see that the one that says main P, any paragraph that's in the main, indent that 2 M's. So look at this. So you can see that that line is indented. Do you see that right there? Right below where it says welcome to San Joaquin. Okay. And then the footer, right, is text aligned right, and you can see that it's aligned right. All right. Lots of cool stuff. Text shadow, right? Don't go overboard on this stuff, all right? There is some text shadow on one of the assignments, so don't go overboard. But you can specify, right, the horizontal offset, the vertical offset, the blur radius, and the shadow color. So if you look at that, you see that right there? That's as a result of the text shadow that you see in the rule for the H1 below, where it says 4 pixels for the horizontal offset and the vertical offset. So you see that's why it's doing that, right? So you could also set the, again, the 4 pixels in red, and you can see here, right, it puts a red shadow at offset by 4 pixels. You see that? Now, I don't know about you, but that's kind of psychedelic. Now, it's kind of hard to read, right? So just know that you want to be tasteful about all of your design work, right? And accessibility. Remember the visually impaired. Remember Bruce. Too much shadow or blur makes text harder to read. All right? Now let's talk about floating. Floating. An image that has been floated to the left of the headings. You see that right there? There's an H2 or an H3 there, and you have this image floated to the left of it, right? Ooh, right? So look at the markup here where it has the image tag, it's got the source attribute, it's got the alt attribute, and it has a width or a height. Either one is perfect, but you need a width or height and the alt attribute. So look at the CSS. It's a global selector. It's saying, hey, format any and all images. Float that sucker to the left. Give it some margin on the right of 1em. And the property that will stop the floating is when you set the main, which is let's go back to the, did I do it? Actually, they don't, but the clear left will stop the floating from happening. So that's what happens. If we make the image a little smaller, you can see here that the text doesn't clear, right, that image, right? All right. The property that will stop the floating before a subsequent element, right? Clear left, right? We'll do more on clear over the next couple of weeks. Let's see, a web page that uses the styles of this chapter. Yeah, this one right here. So this is kind of the end here. So I'll let you go through the slide deck here. You can see here that it's using Normalize, and then it's using our style sheet called main.css. I like to call my style sheets, I like to put them in a folder called CSS, and I like to call them style.css. So you may see some differences. I'm trying to get you in the habit of the way I do it. There's no right way. It's just my way is more popular. All right. So you can see a bunch of markup here with some classes assigned, and then they give you some CSS to go through. And again, pull up the slide deck. It's in the module for introduction, and go through it, and you can see how everything is being done. All right. So we made it. We made it to the end here. Let me just open up module 4. It's going to open up right after I publish this lecture video, and you can see in the introduction I list the modules, the learning outcomes and objectives, the textbook reading, and there is slide decks down at the bottom here. And then each of the modules. Okay, I have Zoom meetings scheduled. I'll let you look at those. No one's attended those, which is not normal. There's usually people who attended them in the past who need help. Example code from the textbook. Download Chapter 4 file resources. The only way you're going to learn is by playing with this stuff, not by trying to memorize it. You're not going to memorize HTML, right? You got to do, right? You wouldn't want a heart surgeon working on you if they only watched videos and read stuff. You would want someone who was operated on people and does it frequently, right? All right. Download Normalize.css. You're going to need that for the assignment. So there's two other things in here. Format on save, Visual Studio Code. So there's an option that I want you to set in Visual Studio Code that'll format your code when you save it. So that's going to help you out. And then there's a really neat extension that'll help you with one of the assignments. I believe it's assignment 5 as of the recording of this video. It's called HTML Tag Wrap. In fact, I recorded a video earlier today that steps you through how to install it and use it. And then, again, the textbook reading and the topics for the slides that I just went over. And last but not least, there's all this stuff. And then I did a review here of relative linking. So I created a video of a crappy little site that I put together that reviews some of the issues that a lot of you have been having trying to link to things in other folders. Highly recommended. Highly recommended. And then we have 2 web assignments. Okay. Again, this may change in the future, folks. So if you're watching this in the future, your instructor may not have these same 2 assignments, but as of the recording of this one, there were 2. And then you have a quiz. So that's it. Catch you on Slack or in class, depending upon which modality you're enrolled in. And I hope you learned a few things. Well, I hope you learned a lot so far in this course. We're in Module 4, the start of Week 4. Have a great week.